All right, so let's get started. Today we have a special session with special guest. Again, this is the second session about edible insects, and today we're going to talk about Ento-Gastronomy with one of the leading chefs in Ento-Gastronomy, I would dare to say, and probably the only author of a book in Italian about edible insect, Loris Caporizzi. So welcome.
Thank you very much. And my book is one of the main books on the Italian market. It's not the only one actually, but it's the only one that is about not only a specific field about entomophagy, but that goes from gastronomy to the actual practical part of cooking insects. It talks about companies, it talks about sustainability. So it's, I would say, one of the ones that have the biggest range of information, let's say.
Awesome. So you're one of the first in Italy, probably dealing with this kind of topic, I guess.
Yeah, it looks like
Awesome.
At the moment.
Awesome. All right, so let's get started. Maybe Loris, you can just introduce yourself and what have you been doing in your career. You're super young, and you immediately took a specific path toward a very unique way of approaching food and gastronomy. So we're curious to see what is going on.
Yes, I always say the most important, like one of the biggest advantages that Italian chefs have is that we have the chance to get professionalized in the very beginning of our educational path, which is not the case in the US, and not the case in many other countries. So that's why I'm younger than, let's say, a bigger part of my colleagues in this environment. And I was born as a fine dining chef, like Michelin star chef. Like my first experiences in gastronomy were already in the Michelin star restaurants. I started at the age of 15 years old with the first internships, and one of my first at 16 years old was Carlo Cracco in Italy. So it's already at the time 2 Michelin star chef and one of very famous Italian chef or master chef and all this kind of TV shows and stuff like that. And when I had this experience, I decided that was my kind of role in the gastronomy industry, because I wanted to have that attention to detail and that specific approach to the service. So from there onwards, I then went on with this kind of career, and I did, like in Italy, another 3 Michelin star restaurant, which is Piazza Duomo in Piedmont. And after that, from the age of 17, I started to have experiences in Michelin star restaurants abroad. First one was in Monte Carlo, was Alain Ducasse restaurant called Louis Quinze. It was the first restaurant. Alain Ducasse, for whoever doesn't know him, is at the moment, after the sad death of Joël Robuchon, is now the most Michelin star chef in the world with about 23, 25 Michelin stars, something like that. Wow. And that was his first restaurant. It was my first experience abroad. And I then finished my studies, and then I moved to Thailand, where obviously I got in touch with entomophagy more. Well, I already, like when I did my thesis, that was the topic. So I was already starting to get interested in this kind of topic. But then moving to Thailand and living there for about 6 months, I had the occasion to go deeper in the culture than whatever is behind the simple act of eating insects. And after that I moved back to Europe. I spent about 2 years, 1.5 years in Paris, again working for a couple of very famous chefs. One of them was, again, Alain Ducasse in Plaza Athénée Hotel. And my current experience is now at the Fat Duck restaurant, which is 3 Michelin star restaurant in the United Kingdom, and was the author of many books, and also the chef that introduced already 15 years ago molecular gastronomy and all the studies that are behind the scientific approach to cuisine. And that was basically my career in terms of gastronomic experience. But when COVID happened and the world started to go on lockdown and all of these things, I then reinvented a bit my profession, because I moved back to Italy from France, and obviously it was impossible to work in a restaurant. It wasn't even what I wanted to do in Italy at that moment. So I moved into consulting and food product development and this kind of world. So I started to consult several restaurant chains, and like food tech companies, startups, and stuff like that. And that's where my knowledge about insects and about food development that comes from Michelin star experience. So where there is a very important like attention to small amounts, that is not the case in normal restaurants, but is the case in Michelin star environments where there is a lot of research and development. And that was the way I had like companies to develop food products, focusing obviously on the gastronomic side, on taste more than the technological part that obviously is up to food technologists. But the collaboration between food technologists and chef, I think, is something very important. It can be a very big strength for a company, and it's not something that is in place that much, or not as much as it should be, in my opinion. And so I've tried to bring my contribute to this kind of word and this kind of approach to the food development. And that's where I then started. Like when my book was published in summer 2020, I then had a bit more authority as well in the entomology field, and then I started to approach this word more and more, basically.
Give us the main insight you got from writing your book.
Unfortunately, the one of the biggest insights that is already very very known in the entomophagy world is obviously the environmental impact that meat has on the world. And I've done some master classes with, for example, the Italian Institute for the Future, and this kind of this kind of teaching environments where we analyze obviously what the World Food Organization is underlining in the past years and decades, and that's something we need to be aware of, and it's going more and it's becoming more and more important even into the world of big companies, and as well as startups and smaller companies. And that's something that immediately comes in, like it's something that you immediately notice when you approach like the reasons why we should improve the consumption of insects, as well as like meat, like cultured meat and stuff like that, is because we need to find food sources that are a bit more sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously the numbers are you probably already discussed that, but we all know that numbers regarding the environmental impact, CO2 emissions, water consumption, and the land consumption are absolutely crazy when you think about meat. And that's something that is really shocking, and is a thing that is actually for me a big strength when we are approaching this world communication wise, because it's something that everyone, when reads this kind of information, is always like shocked for like the impact is so important.
Fantastic. So 2.9 billion people on this planet eat insect as part of their daily way of eating. So now I guess is the problem is really to transition from a rational argument to a more like emotional and pleasurable argument. So philosophically we have the debate between rationality and desire. Now, if rationality is a strong argument for eating insects, now we need to probably work on the desire aspect. And with that, I would segue with one of the general question that always comes to mind, and I'm sure you've dealt with it like a lot. What is blocking us from eating insects?
Well, it's something like there are many, not many, but there are at least a couple of reasons why we are a bit more blocked in the Western world in approaching insects. Because first of all, it's not in our culture that much. There are some small communities, even in Italy, there are some small communities that have been consuming insects quite a while in the past. But the reason why it has been introduced as a novel food is because the consumption has not been very significant before 1997 onwards, and in the past as well. And that's why they've been introduced as a novel food. And this tells us a lot in terms of how insects are far away from our culture, which is not the case in any other continent, basically, because we can think about North America, we can think about Central and South America more, definitely Asia and Africa. where the consumption is very, very eradicated in what's the social tissue, but it's not the case, not that much anyway, for when it comes to Europe and in the Western world in general. And that's why like we don't see ourselves eating insects, and that's why we don't actually consume them, because it simply look a bit weird, and it feels a bit weird to consume insects. But what I always like to say when we get to this topic is that there are many studies underlining that actually the average consumption for the Western consumer per year is half a kilo already, which means
super interesting.
that's something, yeah, that is something very interesting. Obviously, a big part comes to like occasional and consumption that is not something we want to do. Like, for example, a lot of us have been running, biking, and eating some sort of mosquitoes just because they were breathing that moment. Or
maybe they are hidden in our food already.
Exactly. The other point is companies and laws all over the world need to allow a small percentage of contamination coming from insects, because obviously if you are a big company producing jams or tomato sauce or something like that, you cannot be like grandma at home and cutting the tomatoes in like 25 pieces to check there is no worm inside. And that's the reason why the industry and the law needs to include a small percentage of contamination, but obviously on a long period of time, such as like 1 year, for example, you are going to end up eating significant amounts, because it depends a lot. But usually you have products like coffee, sesame seeds, where the percentage allowed and involved are usually for even up to 10%. So we're talking about significant amounts that are allowed. Doesn't necessarily mean they are actually involved, but we still need to assume that we're going to have a percentage that comes from the food that we usually and daily consume. And there is also a percentage that comes from non-voluntary consumption as well, like, especially if you think about children. Obviously, they have the first approach to the world from the mouth, and they're going to end up consuming this kind of products as well. Or the same way when we sleep and we have no control of our movements, and we don't know, like there's people sleeping with opening their mouth and stuff like that. And we need to assume that we have far more insects than humans in the world, and definitely they are going to end up we are going to end up with involuntary consumption at some point. So
in a sense, we are already there. We just need to acknowledge it, like, and make it more delicious. That's really the real issue.
No, but Giacomo, I think that our culture teaches us that insects are not good to eat. In the same way that if you go to UK, then they don't eat horse meat, while in Italy it's more common to eat horse meat, and probably there are social reasons why you should not eat some kind of foods in some kind of places, and so this is really a cultural topic. And so the question is, I've been to Thailand, and I was not able to eat insects because my mind told me not to eat that stuff. So I really want to eat insects consciously. So my question could be for Loris: how can I trick my mind in eating insects, or what do we have to do to teach our Western culture to learn how to force this block in a way? Because it's a cultural block.
At the same time, I think also like just the time is very important. So if you consider that any kind of food that we now consider as traditional food, once upon a time they were like innovative food. So I think this is also something important. So there is something is triggering our mind, but at the same time it's also a matter of time. So maybe in 5 years, we won't be talking anymore, like as we are doing right now about this issue, because it will be just something kind of common. Of course, we have to deal and to understand what are the main ways to communicate in the right way it is. But at the same time, also, I think this is also something very important. For example, I don't know, like sushi is a very good, and raw fish in general is a very good example of that. So yes, you have to communicate that, but at the same time, it's just, it needs sometimes to be accepted.
Yeah, I think it's the two key aspects are indeed the time passing and the information provided, and that's the way for the consumer to understand more and then get more involved. And that's what startups do, as the work that this kind of world is doing is exactly providing information and creating products. The product has another very important role, because obviously it depends a lot where you start from when approaching this kind of world. So obviously, if you're gonna put on your plate something that is like the ideal consumption from a gastronomic point of view, which is starting from the alive insects, like we do with lobster and shrimps, then obviously you're going to end up with a product that has a very delicious taste, but at the same time doesn't have like the shape that a Western consumer will be led to approach. While if you start from flowers, crackers, bread, pasta, and these kind of products, then the Western consumer will be much more involved and much more interested, because the shape that is seen in front of him is actually a shape of something that he already knows. So we are introducing something that we don't know and we don't understand in a way that makes it more understandable and much more approachable.
I agree, and I think here the conflict is really between how we eat, like with our mind or with our taste bud. And the lobster, I think, is a great example. And the way I think about it is also by thinking about what is called the bellman bug, which is basically, it's an Australian lobster. It looks like a huge cockroach essentially, and if you Google it, is pretty sick. And what is fun is that people get past that. So in that sense, you have taste bud like getting over the mind, and that's the case for any shellfish. Lobster, they look like huge. They're like huge insects at the end of the day. But when you see them, you already taste how delicious like a lobster tail melted in butter is. So your buds totally conquer your mind. The way I think about insect is exactly the opposite. We're still in a phase where it's the mind that is leading, and the insects are not as delicious as and as recognizable as delicious as they could be, and so there is still this extra step to be made. So Loris, you have a huge job ahead for sure to make insects delicious.
Yeah, I've been asking in the past what would be the way to, in general, not only about insects, but what is the way to introduce a new product in the market, and how we see the future in 2025, 2050, in terms of introduction of food products in the industry and for the final consumer. And my opinion is that it needs to be a way bigger collaboration between food tech companies and chefs, because we see these two roles in very different ways and very separate. But the truth is, they're providing different things to the same consumer. So they have a very big understanding of the consumer from different sides and in different ways. And so the collaboration between these two parts is actually what can make the food revolution for the next years way faster, and also more understanding of what the consumer wants, and so more successful.
And that's probably also what will drive the big corporation to shift toward insect. So it needs to come from the consumer at the end, because I highly doubt that big corporation would be like, the Procter & Gamble saying, hey, this is cricket snacks, here you go on the shelves. Nobody's going to buy it. But if it comes from the consumer, from an informed consumer, which is sensitive to this kind of topic, being its sustainability and sort of planet-friendly food and high protein and all the benefits, that's definitely something that can create a big shift on the markets for sure. Very interesting.
Yeah, but I think about cultured meat, Impossible Burger and so on, they were imposed by the industry because they just look like normal traditional food we are already used to, and so that was very easy to communicate and to market top down. While on the other end, if we would like to sell insects the way people eat insects in Thailand, like just fried, but they really look like insects, it will be really difficult in Western countries. While I was very impressed by Small Giants, because Small Giants is selling me insects that look like normal crackers. So my mind tells me that it's just the food I'm used to eat since I was a kid. So it's very
approachable
approachable and offensive to me. So it's easier. So I think that all the topic about the high-end cuisine and inserting the insects in high-end cuisine is talking about Noma. It's easier to eat insects at Noma because you are in the context that lets you eat something that is not ordinary. So your mind says, I'm here. I traveled to Denmark, and I'm here to eat the unexpected. I ate like I don't know reindeer brain last time. So I'm open to accept everything, but in a normal menu, it will be very difficult. So high-end cuisine as a role in this, but then we have to find a way to trickle down these new ingredients to everybody, and that's a whole different story, because the normal people in the street will not be ready to eat insects just because a very small number of people is eating these things, the fat duck or something like that. No, I don't know, Loris, what you think about it.
Yeah, it's definitely true that when you are in a Michelin star environment, or you are in a very fancy fine dining restaurant where you're spending also a lot of money to eat, you are then open to try whatever they offer you, and your mind is already set up for this kind of experience. But it's also true that there are several chains that have tried to introduce insects. For example, I'm thinking about some Mexican chain like Oaxaca and these kind of chains. They have tried already to introduce insects in small amounts. I'm not aware fully about what was the result, like economically wise, but I've seen that there was actually a very big marketing strength, because then was the place where the consumer that was interested and couldn't afford to go to a Michelin star restaurant was actually led because of their interest into trying these kind of products. So then food also, like the average or the well-known brand in terms of food chain, is also potentially, I think, a good vehicle for this kind of culture to start to reach the final consumers. And the other one is obviously the food tech production. So companies like small giants that are creating products, they are also delivering something that any kind of consumer all over the Western world can receive, and that can be the start to approach this kind of product. And obviously, if they start from the cracker and the month after they buy the flour because they want to, for example, make their own bread and try this kind of product in a cake, the day after, or the month after, or the year after, they're gonna be willing to potentially go to a restaurant or get fresh insects and cook them at home. Obviously, is a long-term process, but it starts like that. So it's actually potentially a good start in this way already.
So before we talk about like product and menus, what do you think is the status right now of the Ento-Gastronomy, high-end Ento-Gastronomy? I mean, what's your feel in terms of international chefs, how they're seeing it, what's their sensitivity, and who's the people on the edge in terms of Ento-Gastronomy? What's your thought on that?
So what I've noticed is that we have a bigger boom of this kind of products in the past, I would say 5, 6, 7 years already. Like there are restaurants that have been created with the purpose of just having insect in every dish on the menu. And that was an explosion more for, I felt like it was more for a marketing purpose. So, the restaurant where you go and you eat insects. And now this kind of business model have been disappearing a bit, because probably was a bit earlier for this kind of setup, and also was not like the consumer, I think, was not looking for a place where you eat insects on 10 dishes, but it's more interesting to have a full tasting menu where you have maybe 2, 3, 4 dishes where insects are involved. They're not involved because you want to say, I have an insect on the plate, but it's because you actually do the research and development job that Michelin star chefs have to do, which is also analyzing texture, flavors, and nutritional values. And at that point the insect is there because that's the best ingredient in that specific plate. And that's where we are now, I think, where the Michelin star restaurants are using insects. They're using insects because they make sense in the plate, not just for a marketing opportunity. And that's where, for example, restaurants like Noma or restaurants like the Fat Duck, we have a dish is called Woods and represents a natural forest, basically. So you have mushrooms, you have beetroots, you have a very healthy dish with a lot of powders from different roots and stuff like that. And then you have like these kind of mealworms that are just dry, and is obviously you are creating an idea in your guest's mind, which is I'm eating the woods, I'm eating a forest in my plate, and that's something that makes sense conceptually. Or otherwise, is because, for example, what Noma does is the ants are in that case very nice because you can actually taste the lemongrass, you can actually taste what the insect is made of, and that's where you use it. You either use it because you like the flavor, you like the texture, or you like the idea of having it, but it's not just because you want to say I have an insect I have insects all over the place in my menu, because at that point it just becomes marketing perspective that can work for a while but cannot work forever.
I agree. I mean, we've seen pop-up restaurants coming up with, menus as curiosities. So try like the cricket, try the cockroach, and usually is sold as like a full insect. But it's fascinating what you were saying, that insects are sort of gaining their legitimate status as an ingredient, which is like another color for a chef to actually build a dish. So it's not just something to throw in for marketing purposes. No, we want the ants because that's the flavor profile, that's what they give us to the dishes, and that's the perfect combination for that specific dish and what the chef want to express. So yeah, let's talk about that exactly. How you think in terms of dishes creation, pairing. I think I've seen some of your material where you mention how basically like that strawberries goes well with tomatoes, and then like exactly like that you can have like a parallel that once you know that something goes well with something else, insect can play the same kind of role. So if you can elaborate a little more on this idea.
Yes, the idea is that obviously when you are in the industry, I mean like the gastronomy industry and the fine dining cuisine for a while, you then begin to have some sort of deeper understanding of what ingredients are made of, also from a chemical point of view, as well as for what is nutritional point of view. But when you think about the taste, then you need to elaborate more, and you need to know your products. The more products you know, the more pairing you're going to have in your mind. And with insects, it's a very large amount of options, because we are talking about more than 1,400 edible species. So we have a lot of room to play. And there are many different insects also for similar species that then have very different taste according to what I eat, according to where they live. And because of that, you have a lot to play with. But also the nice part, which is the same, which is the interesting part that is true with bigger animals, but is much less relevant because obviously the animal is bigger, is that they taste the taste that you have is what they've been eating while farming them. And that's something very important as well, talking about the fresh product, which is what can be used at the moment in fine dining gastronomy. And then in that case, you can have something that tastes the way you want it to taste. And that's very, very fascinating for a chef. They've been trying to do that a lot. If you think about several kinds of meat as well. But obviously when you have a cow, you can feed the cow with hazelnuts the whole life. You will taste it a little bit, but we are still talking about an animal that weighs 100 kilos. So the dispersion is very big. While a cricket that weighs like 4, 5, 6 grams, you're going to have a very higher concentration of flavor. And that's where Michelin star chef can play a lot with. And then you can have pairings. Like if you want a specific kind of flavor profile, you can then get it potentially. Like there are restaurants like three Michelin star restaurants like the Fat Duck that have been or Noma that have been working very closely to with several kinds of food companies to get products created specifically for them. At the same way, they could farm or they could work with farms that create insects for them, not in a like weird scientific way, but just by feeding them in different ways. And then that's where you can have several pairings and you can work a lot. You can feed a cricket with carrots, or you can feed a cricket with mint, and it's gonna be very, very different. Obviously, you're not feeding only with that, but you can work a lot. Like you can have insects that are mainly fed with herbs, or mainly fed with roots, or mainly fed with fruits, and you're gonna have a lot to play with when you then want to create your dishes. So that's something very, very interesting from a chef point of view.
Or you go in the other direction and then you go for insect terroir. So I want the Thai cricket because they live in a special ecosystem, and I want to taste the Thai terroir made of whatever feeding they're using in Thailand. So maybe that's also another direction, but it's absolutely fascinating. All right, fantastic. Yeah, let's talk about products actually, in terms of how easy is it to while you were talking, it came to me like you're kind of looking at insect in terms of like spices in a way. So you kind of try the spices, you try to see how the combination. So how difficult or how easy is it to source all the different varieties so that you can actually play with flavors and textures? Like how is your process there?
At the moment, it's actually very difficult to source these kind of products. You can source quite a lot of dried insects, like you can go even to spiders and scorpions if you want, but you're gonna just get the dry ones. You can get obviously locusts, you can get crickets, you can get these kind of products very easily when they are dry. Well, not very easily, but you need to know where, but you can buy them online in a very good way. Is a bit more, is very, very difficult if you want to have like the fresh ones. At the moment I managed to have them just in a couple of occasions, but it's something that is very difficult even from a chef point of view, because again, like the law has just been evolving in this period, from 2015 2018 till now. The evolution is not being completed, and there have been a lot of changes also for what like geopolitically Europe is. We think about Brexit and these kind of things, and because of this, it's very, very difficult to get like fresh products, because in many countries there is no demand, or if you have demand, you don't have laws. And then in that moment, you're gonna have problems to source this kind of insect, even for like a very friendly and domestic use, not necessarily a restaurant where you have paying guests. So
Awesome.
it's still something where we need to work, and we need to improve in order to make it easier for the final consumer to get this kind of product. Because at the moment, not for a B2B but for a B2C, is as a business, in a business perspective, is very hard for the final consumer to approach this kind of food unless there is a link like Small Giant is. So a company that is sourcing, producing, and packing and delivering. Then you need to fill a huge gap across the chain, and that's something that only companies can do at the moment, and the final consumer is not able to do as easily at the moment.
Awesome. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about what is Small Giants doing and how you guys are kind of working together to bring to the general consumer like at least some ingredients to play and start experimenting, which I think is totally awesome. So Edo, Fras, if you want to jump in and help out Loris, that would be cool to see how you're exactly playing this game in terms of flowers, new products, etc.
Yeah, so at the moment, our main product is the crackers that we are making, and but we will add very soon a range of flowers. So one will be with crickets, so cricket flower, and the other one will be the mealworm flower. Actually, it's not mealworm; it's buffalo, so it's a specific type of mealworm. But anyway, what we want to do is, and actually something that I wanted to say before is that also for us, we notice when the crickets were found using, I don't know, fish meal, because still this is something that is quite common, especially in Southeast Asia. They try to lower the cost by using the feed that they use for other products, for other animals, so for shrimps or for chickens. So, and you really notice the difference when they change the feed, when the feed is different, when the feed is a good one, so if made of vegetables, oats, carrots, or cassava leaves, or other type of vegetables. So it's really important. I mean, probably the fresh insects is the best, but also there is a huge difference between the type of dried insect that you can find on the market. So what we are trying to do is like source a good product that is a good one. It's not like the cheapest and that's it. So we try to find a good balance between the conveniency, so how easy and how also how cheap it is. So we are not like picking the best of the best, because our goal is to get as many people as possible to eat insects. So if we had the best of the best, probably for us it will be against our own mission to like try to involve as many people as possible, and still the price is in this industry is quite a pain point, because it's a niche market. So the price point is quite high at the moment for all the products. So we try to have a product that tastes good. So it's like the insects are fed with good ingredients. It's also like quite cheap, so it's not at least when you see the ratio between protein and the cost is quite good. So you have a good ratio, and also we with the flour, I think everyone can try their own recipes, while with the crackers, and later on we will add other savory snacks, you will find the chance to you have the chance to try insects for the first time, like in very easy. So they're ready to go products. So like you don't have to cook anyway. So your first experience is we hope spot on. So there is no extra step that you have to do. You just need to open a bag and try them. While with the cricket flour, the process is a little bit more complicated. So you need to understand how to use it. So this is quite actually an important part, and this is something we want to collaborate with chefs like Loris. So create a sort of a set of recipes that can help the consumers to create or at least have an experience. Probably, like I'm not as good as Loris in the kitchen, of course. So, but like his recipe can inspire me, and I can try to understand a little bit what I can use the cricket flour or the buffalo worm flour for.
And I just wanted to add that actually our ultimate goal as a company is, as Edo was mentioning, is to have as many people as possible eating insect, but also something is very, very important is to get people eating insect, of course, not every day, but like not just to try them a first time. So something like a savory snack, an insect-based savory snacks as our cracker bites are at the moment, is something extremely easy for anyone to add to a diet. And this is the most important thing, because the idea is that we want to be again, we want to give an alternative, a protein alternative. And so this is something has to happen like on a weekly base at least. Every day would be the best, but of course it's not that simple. And so this is also something we always think about. So something like a savory snacks is going exactly in that direction, but at the same time, like the insect flowers, they are also going in that direction. Of course, is for, let's say, a more pro client who is willing to cook as well, but at the same time, it's also more flexible. So it's giving many different possibilities. And if we have amazing chef like Loris helping us with the recipe, is also changing the way people perceive them.
So I have a question about the flowers. Bakery, fresh pasta, or dessert, Loris? where is the trick? Where does it do the trick? Because we have Ale, who's a great baker. I'm kind of dabbing a little bit in the naan making Indian style, but I want to know what you think about it. Oh, your audio.
Yes. Well, the first answer is it depends on flour, because usually like the process from where we get the flour from is usually a toasting process at some point, and this obviously has an impact on the taste that the flour is going to have in the hand. And because of this, usually like desserts are a bit more tricky, because some flours are quite strong and maybe too strong and too nutty for some specific kinds of dessert. It's not the case with like cookies and stuff like that, because you can still balance it properly as is a quite simple recipes, but it may be a bit more tricky if you're trying to do something a bit more fine, like already like a fine biscuit for like tea, for example, and stuff like that. Is difficult to make if you have a very strong nutty flour, because that's not what you're looking for that kind of pairing with a very light beverage, for example. Usually, like the majority of the flour that are on the market at the moment are flours that have a very nutty flavor, but obviously you have, when you serve the flour, you have many choices, and you are able to get a lighter version, or a flour that is somewhere in between and is not on like the most toasted flour or the lighter flour either. And at that point, then you can play with these things, and you can actually produce any kind of like product that can be a bread, can be a pasta, and can be a dessert as well. The other point is starting to understand how to use the other ingredients to combine them with the insect flour, because the insect flour has a very high level of proteins, and most of the time a very high level of fat as well. And this means that the way that flour is going to absorb water and produce gluten, well, not from the insect flour, but from the normal flour cut with an insect flour, is then going to have different water needs when you are going to balance your recipe. And in that moment, you're going to need to understand the technological part, where you may have a dough that is way more strong, and then that could be very good for a bread, for example, but it can be harder if you want to work on a dessert, because typically you don't need gluten, you don't need a very strong protein tissue when you want to create a dessert. And then that can be something you need to work on, because if the amount of water absorbed is much higher, then you're going to need to balance the recipe differently, adding maybe more eggs or more milk or more soy milk or whatever you're adding. And then it comes to a personal idea of how a dessert would be, but it also comes to an understanding of your ingredients.
Awesome. All right, so big question. When will insect go mainstream? What is missing? What are the driver which are missing that in part you guys are trying to push, but that will definitely break out and have the ingredients, the product just go mainstream? What will take?
I think the main thing would be, again, the product itself. So a product that is already mainstream and contains insect. When we're gonna find the product that is very widely appreciated by the consumers and includes insect, at that point there will be, if it's as the guys underlined already, the main thing is getting a very, very big number of people to try. And in order for this big number of people to try, you need to have a product that is appreciated by a wide number of people. So in that way, many people are going to start to approach this world, and eventually a big percentage of them will go on trying this kind of products. While if the audience is still quite small, then it's going to be harder, because there is always a triage. There's always a selection and the percentage that will go on and the percentage that will not go on. So the bigger the starting audience, the bigger, I guess, is going to be the market, and then eventually we are going to have finally an explosion of these kind of products.
Awesome. Give us 3 general takeaway to someone that is starting or willing to eat insect but has never done so. What would you say?
As in, like, recipe wise, or
as in general recommendation? Like, why not recipe wise or product or general way of thinking about it?
The first thing is that for how how the world is today, we gotta be curious, and we need to be willing to try new things. It doesn't come only for these kind of products, but it's also, and it's something that I always say to Italian people especially, is you need to be open. You have cities like London, like many American cities, or Paris or other places where you have already, like, for example, a lot of Asian restaurants. While for us, it's been very, very hard to introduce already sushi in Central and South Italy. And we don't have, for example, I don't know, Vietnamese restaurants, if not some of them maybe Milan, but because it's the most European city that we have in Italy. And but the reason why it's going delayed is that there is no understanding and not much will to discover new things, and that's something we need to work on as with new generations like mine. We need to be more understanding and more open, because globalization has happened already. We just need to realize and be conscious about it, and we need to be more understanding of and willing to try new products. And that's also the way to approach insects. We need to be curious, and we need to try and see, and not just judging, because obviously there is a cultural expectation. That would be the first advice I would say. The second one is a more of a general advice as a chef, is we need to go back to having moms and ladies and men as well cooking. I love takeaway. There is a lot of good things coming with takeaway and with the opportunity of having different kind of products delivered to your house. But it's also a very, very big part of our culture as Italian people, and in general in the Western world, and as well as all over the world, is that before we were used to respect our tradition, but because we were cooking at home every single day, so we are moving to a very different perspective, which is very good. But we still, I think, need to keep a balance and still keep cooking, because that's a way to understand ingredients. That's a way to share time and share experiences, and that's something that could be that needs to be improved. And if we do that, then we're going to be more curious, because the more we eat at home, the more we want variety, and the more we're going to be led to approach new products like insects are. That's probably the second one. And now I run out of ideas. What's
Oh no, you already gave like 2 huge ones. So my last question for you is, what's next for you?
That is a very, very tricky question as well. As I said, in the past year, I've been reinventing my professional role a lot, and the idea is to be more and more involved in the next years in what is the evolution of the food scene worldwide. So still restaurants play a big role in my life, and will probably be like that in a way, but I would like to start more and more to work with closely with companies that are actually making the difference for the final consumer on a large scale. Mm-hmm. And that's why I've decided to join in a very small way at the moment, a small giant, which is obviously trying to make the difference for a bigger number of people that what a restaurant could do, because especially these kind of restaurants, like fine dining restaurants, obviously they are devoted to a niche, and the companies like in the food world are trying their best to address a very, very big number of people, and that's where the change will happen, in my opinion. And that's why I want to be as much involved as I can in this kind of evolution in the future.
All right, some last consideration, guys. Any last words? Edo, Francesco, Ale?
Actually, no, I was thinking before, like what it takes to get insect as popular. I think also like make them cool. I think this is very important. Like we said about wheat with our mind or with our taste buds. But yeah, I think this is quite important. I think Loris, for example, and other chefs are playing with the plating and the positioning, like recreating a forest on a dish. And like on our side, the Small Giants, what we're trying to do is like play with the packaging, create a cool brand identity, like a cool packaging. I think this is also important because the impact, the first reaction of the packaging or the dish is very, very important when you're approaching new food.
Yes, I think the trust is a very, very key aspect, because already the product is something that may be scary for some people, but may be difficult to understand. But if there is a trust in a brand, that's where you're going to be led to approach it, with a clearer mind, and with an open mind, and then you will eventually start to like it and use it more and more.
I really like the fact that Small Giants and Loris are approaching society from two different sides. Small Giants probably from the bottom up, starting from the common people at the supermarket wanting to buy some cracker bites, and Loris from the top of society, from the 1% that eat at Michelin-starred restaurants. And I think that mm, cultural change needs both approaches. So it's very good and it's very interesting. And probably the two approaches combined will change our mentality towards new kind of food. So it's been a really interesting and inspiring chat for me.
I just wanted to ask Loris if we still have some spare time about if you want to talk about that. I don't know if you want, but your experience with Carlo Cracco, because I have in mind both Edo and I, we have in mind, actually, I also met him in person just for a few minutes. We have in mind like the Wired cover of a few years ago with him cover in I don't remember if grasshoppers. Yeah, grasshoppers, I guess. So at that time, he seems to be to us like someone was really experimenting with edible insects. But yeah, since you had like a direct experience, I was curious about that.
Yes, Carlo Cracco has been experimenting a lot, especially in the past, when he had to build his image as a very, very new Michelin star chef. And he was doing he's still doing very interesting stuff. But now, I don't know if you are aware, but he has moved, I think 3-4 years ago, his restaurant in a different side in Milan, which is the Vittorio Emanuele Gallery, which is a very, very city center. And that also represented for him a change in their approach and their culinary identity. So now this search for innovation has been a bit reducing, because obviously the customer base has changed a little bit. But it is really true that in the past he's been experimenting a lot with several ingredients like plankton, for example, or different kinds of seaweeds, as well as insects. And he has done a couple of dinners where he used grasshoppers like glazed in different kinds of wine reductions, and he served a good amount of guests in a very private way. But still, it was very hard, especially in that moment, to set up this kind of tasting. It's still very hard now. And he also had a bit of problems with that, probably because obviously our law before 2015 and 2018, which is actually when the regulation 2283 came into place, was categorizing insects just as an infection source. Yeah, so basically you couldn't farm insects, because that would be just an contaminated product. It would not be a farm. And it was very hard for him, and I really appreciated at that point that he tried to do his best to underline a need, which was starting to think and starting to approach this kind of product. And I think I really appreciated his pioneer idea, and that's why I also then went to work with him a couple of years later, because I saw that there was that research and there was the idea of showing something that wasn't necessarily convenient at that moment, at that time, but he had the will to show a product that needed to be underlined.
Awesome. So guys, with that, I want to thank you, Loris, for joining and to share a great insight. Very, very curious. And we could have gone for hours, but unfortunately, this time available. Thank you, Edo and Francesco, co-founders of Small Giants. And thank you, Ale, from Gummy Industries. So guys, I'll see you in the next session.
Thank you, Giacomo.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and have a nice day.
Thank you.